Welcome. I'm Kevin Miller. This is a podcast for your personal evolution. In this episode, the science around can I succeed? Do I belong? Am I loved? And we're with Stanford Psychology Professor Dr. Gregory Walton. So look at those, listen to those three questions again. Can I succeed? Do I belong? Am I loved? I'm tempted to feel these questions address the root issue of every human on earth. And as I continue to research personal identity and how we as a culture seem to be more fragile and threatened than ever, I feel these questions are just primary. So I had a conversation with Dr. Gregory Walton. So Greg is the co-director of the Dweck-Walton Labs. That's Dweck as in Carol Dweck, the legend of mindset. Well, Greg's also a professor of psychology at Stanford, and much of Greg's research investigates psychological processes that contribute to major social problems. His research is supported by many foundations, including the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And as weighty as all this sounds, Greg's quest is to discover simple psychological shifts that build trust, belonging, and confidence. He's culminated his findings in a new book. It's titled Ordinary Magic, The Science of How We Can Achieve Big Change with Small Acts. So, can addressing these huge questions really be so simple? Well, what I came to as we talked, and you're about to hear, was yes. I mean, the answers can be simple because they cut to the root issues, the root cause issues of ourselves, our very selves. But, and I'm going to put a but in there, I don't call them necessarily easy. Simple, maybe not easy. I mean, not really at all. I mean, at the top of the show, I pull this quote out from Greg. This is actually in his book. He says, an hour-long surgery can change your life forever. Is there any reason a precise psychological exercise can't do the same? Well, sure. And going under the knife's a big decision. So is, as you're about to hear, choosing to believe differently than you have. If you want to hone in on such big questions for yourself and your purpose and get that integrated into your work in a business, that's what I do best. I'd be honored to connect with you. You can find me at kevinmiller.co or email me at kmiller@kevinmiller.co. All right. Coming up next here, my discussion with Dr. Gregory Walton about the big questions of our lives. Let's evolve ourselves. Greg, when I got into the book, I think the thing that sparked my interest most was a statement you had in the intro, in the preface of the book. And you said an hour-long surgery can change your life forever. Is there any reason a precise psychological exercise can't do the same? So you had me at hello on that. So thank you. I'm grateful to talk about this today.
Great. Yeah, that's a wonderful place to begin.
Well, as I continued reading, what I found is, I mean, you talk about, the simple psychological shifts that intercept cycles of doubt and how these, I mean, even again, I've got, the tagline, the science of how we can achieve big change with small acts. And it just got me to thinking about how these primary psychological shifts that we make can be somewhat simple. It's not rocket science. It's not super deep. Doesn't mean it's easy though. I find that it's super simple and it's sometimes the hard. I don't want to say that it has to be hard, but it's simple. Doesn't mean it might be easy though. Fair?
It certainly doesn't mean it always happens.
Yeah.
Right. There's a reason that we live in a world that's complicated and has a lot of troubles.
So in this, is it fair to say that a lot of this, I felt like what you're doing is you're looking at an issue and what you're doing is kind of cutting to the root of it. Like, let's go right to the root cause. Because if we look at all these symptomatic things, we don't get much progress. But if we can go dive here to the root issue and address it and cut it out, then we can mix it or affect it.
Yeah. I mean, certainly, people could argue about what root means, but certainly the root psychological and social cause, like how people are thinking and feeling about each other and about themselves and relating in a moment. And like in lots of conflict situations and lots of school situations and lots of work situations, like that's what's at play.
It got me thinking some of your examples of just my own journey, Greg, of looking at things and going, man, why am I, looking back, why does that pattern keep happening? And that's what I often found. Is there some root issue? So let's use an example. So this is.
I'd love to, can you share one? I'd love to hear one.
Oh gosh. Okay. You ready to get candid?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's go there.
I had somebody take me through a life plan. Okay. However many years back, looking at businesses. I'd start a business, it would succeed, and then for some reason end. Go to the next one and end. It was just a perfect graph of that and going, what's at the root of this? And to make a long story short, I very often failed to have a financial plan, but that wasn't even it. It was more so the baggage, negative perspective I had towards money. And that's what kept coming up over and over again.
You're a businessman who doesn't want to think about money.
Yeah. So you're a businessman running everything like a nonprofit ministry.
You like the business, you like the service, you like the relationships, but you just didn't like the money.
I was enamored with here's a problem, here's a solution, or here's a desire, here's a way to provide it. And that drove me. And then I had some negative issues with money. And so I would put that off and you could just see me sabotage it over and over and over.
Yeah. Do you have an understanding of where that negative relationship to money came from for you?
Yes.
Okay. Some story about that?
A couple different places. One, it seems to be and I still struggle with putting it off on genetics, heredity, whatever, but I come from Amish, literally.
Yeah.
And money wasn't a focus. My grandfather, really ashamed of money that he made. He actually did make some. Kind of passed on to my dad, same thing, businessman we never talked about money. We talked about business and ideas, never talked about money really. So I had it as not much influence and maybe kind of a bad thing there. And then I also had a significant experience in my 20s where I had to some degree, good fortune of running with some older, very wealthy, very affluent, very successful men that I got to see behind the curtains some big downfalls morally and ethically. And so I associated being a businessman with not really taking care of people. So I went forward as a businessman, but I wanted to prove I'm all heart, not about money. And I did. I proved that I lead with my heart and we have no financial plan whatsoever. And if anything, we shun it.
And then the business collapse.
Yeah.
So, okay. So you had this realization and then what did you do with that? How did you had the life coach, you saw that pattern. How did the story continue?
It got better with awareness of, okay, let's address the finances. Didn't fix it right off the bat, helped it be a little bit better. I brought myself to looking at money and realizing, look, I know I'm doing good. Let's also do good with money so we can continue the business. And then I shut one down that really had helped people and it really disappointed a lot of people.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's fascinating, right? I mean, it sounds like what you needed, you had all these kinds of implicit influences that were associating money with bad things.
Yeah.
And what you needed and would have benefited from was a direct way to think about what is money, what does it represent to you, what are the values that are associated with it, what is its role amidst your other values, and how can you kind of use it for your ends rather than just ignore it and be the victim of it, be at its mercy.
Yeah. And so again, this root issue. So that's what I thought of, Greg, when, again, I think it's right in the beginning of your book. And I'll read right out of the book. You said you found that just an hour helping new college students work through the question of whether they could belong in college helped them. You said that helped them stay engaged and achieve at a higher rate. 10 years later, they were happier, more successful in their careers. And that felt spot on. Like here we are with these students and we're trying to help them perform here and understand here and get them in a study group and whatever. Meanwhile, we missed the root thing of they're not sure that they even belong here. And that's going to sabotage it.
And that's also like your story.
Yeah.
It's a doubt, a negative feeling that comes about from a real circumstance. Like you're talking about your Amish background. You're talking about the complicated relationship between, there's a complicated relationship between the Amish and modern society, and money represents a lot of that.
Yeah.
And you had this personal experience in the 20s that kind of affirmed that negative representation. For, kids of color who are going to college, or for first generation college students, they're also operating in a social and cultural environment that asks the question of that raises the question of those doubts, whether someone like them can belong in college. You're going into a space that has not included your community before, maybe a space that says people like you are less deserving. That's a doubt that creeps into the mind. And when you don't have the opportunity to step back and think about that directly and intentionally, you're at the mercy of it.
That's okay. There's my interest. I mean, Greg, in my own book, my book's called What Drives You. And one of the key aspects of, as we go through these key areas of life, is I kind of did the research of where do we often sabotage ourselves? We say we want X, but then what's really driving you? And a lot of this came from my own experience of thinking, I'm driven, but I'm being driven by something I didn't realize that sabotaged me.
And in the short term, what we often do, I think, is we suppress it. Like, you didn't want to think about money. Like, money was it was not a good thing to think about. It was immoral, and you would rather it didn't exist, maybe even. And then, if you're a student, if you're an 18-year-old going to college and you're excited to go to college, like, you don't want to be thinking about not belonging in college. Like, you're going to suppress that thought. But if you just suppress it, you're not actually dealing with it. You're not actually using your prefrontal cortex to say, like, what is this thing? How can I think about this best? What's my stance? What stance do I want to take towards this? And a lot of what I call wise interventions, which is the name for a lot of this work, basically efforts to kind of create that space for people to think through things that are important and that matter for them, that they might have doubts about or negative thoughts about that they haven't fully contended with. So that could be something like a student worrying about their belonging when they come to college. And it's in that case, you can share stories from other students about that experience that model ways of understanding belonging in college. And you can start to tell your own story about how you want to think about your belonging in college. And in the money example that you're describing, it would be about, like, what are different ways that people think about money? What would be a useful way for me to think about money? How can I kind of take that stance towards money for myself? And I think that a lot of the time in life, you said you have 9 kids, right? Like, we're running around. You've got like a lot of, errands to do, school drop-offs to make, lunches to prepare, whatever it might be. And sometimes we don't have that time, especially when we need it, to step back and think about that thing and make it right for ourselves.
So when you look at a wise intervention, let's go back to the school aspect of realizing or addressing whether somebody feels like they belong or not, which I assume if you're talking with college kids, it may not be something they're even remotely aware of or have thought of. But if you dig in and they find out, they're like you said in the book, they're the first one to ever go to college in their family. I think that
in some cases we suppress these thoughts because we don't want to. People sometimes are aware of them, but they suppress them too, right? Like, you're aware that you've got this thing and you don't want to go there. And then your kind of immediate reaction is to suppress it, like an emotion that you don't want. Your first reaction is to suppress it, but that's actually not very healthy or helpful. It doesn't help you actually contend with that or understand where that's coming from, to value it in the way that it should be valued, but also to not let it control you, to decide how you want to think about that for yourself. So are you there, Kevin?
Yeah, I'm here.
So with belonging interventions, you share stories from older students that talk about worries about belonging and the transition to college, that talk about how they experience that represents those worries as normal, and then talks about how people built their belonging over time, how people reached out to student groups to make friends, to professors, how that might have been difficult at first, that might have been not always successful, but in the end, that built the trajectories that supported people through that coming of age process of college. And in our research, we showed that that can really transform people's lives, and it can be particularly helpful for kids who are in a situation where you would worry most about belonging, like a student in the first generation going to college, or a student of color at a predominantly white institution, or a woman in a predominantly male field.
So when you look at that, how much emphasis do you put on just helping, like in that case, a student, helping them be aware that, oh, you've got some belonging issues, not as opposed to, but in conjunction with actually resolving it and helping them believe that they do actually belong?
Yeah, I think it's not about telling somebody, it's not about therapy in the sense that it's not like you individually have something distinctly wrong with you. It's like that, it's more that this is a kind of circumstance in which lots of people have this feeling. It's a normal kind of feeling. Like to worry about whether you, I mean, for anybody, like I went to college thousands of miles from where I was brought up. And I felt homesick, and I felt like I didn't have any friends, and I didn't know if anybody would want to hang out with me, right? And I'm from a very privileged background when it comes to college. I'm a white man. I'm straight. My parents are both college professors. I grew up in a college town. Like I couldn't be more privileged. And yet I still had those feelings of homesickness. And so it's about talking, it's about being able to see those questions, see those worries. Is this a place in which I'll belong? To understand that they're normal, that there's nothing wrong with you, to understand where they're coming from. In the case of money for you, to get to that insight about how your background and your family has thought about money in the past, what it represents to you. In that case, I would think about the value that that has for you, the value that that discomfort represents. About who you want to be as a person and how you want to be in the world. And then to be intentional about how you want to contend with that. Like, how do I want to build my belonging in college? What would be the ways that I could do that? How do I want to think about money, and money that has positive social ends, so that I can produce a business that's self-sustaining and keeps going and succeeds and continues to provide the goods and services that I value. But I also think that there are times where, I want to tell you a little story. I think there are times where we're just unaware, and especially in interpersonal dynamics, and we need to listen better. We need to listen better both to ourselves, but also sometimes to other people. So the other day I was having a conversation with my daughter, Lucy, who's 12. And when she was little, we lived in a condo. And now we live in a house. And when we moved to the house, it's this old house. It's 100 years old. There's all these kind of nooks and crannies. And I thought like it'd be so much fun to play hide and seek in this house, like with my kids. And but she never wanted to do that. She never wanted to play hide and seek. And every time I suggested it, she said no. And I didn't really understand why. And then she told me that that she reminded me of this thing that happened back in the condo when we were playing hide and seek in the condo. And she was probably like 3 years old. And what happened was that we were playing hide and seek, and there was a little chair in the room. And I covered the blanket with a chair, and then she went away, and then I went to hide. And to hide, I removed the chair from underneath the blanket and took the chair's place. So I'm hiding in the middle of the room under this blanket where the chair had been. And she came out, and there's all these people watching, and she walked right past me. And then I came out and surprised her, and everybody laughed. Everybody thought it was very funny. But I don't think that she liked it. And I don't think it was that she was scared. I think that it was more of a kind of embarrassment feeling for her. But I didn't know that. Like, I didn't understand that. And so then when I was proposing we play hide and seek in the house, and she would say no, she just said, I remembered that experience. I didn't like that. I didn't like that feeling. But I didn't know that. And because I didn't know that, I couldn't talk with her about it. I couldn't understand it for myself. I couldn't apologize, for example.
Goodness. So again, I keep coming back to I know you said people describe it differently or define root, but root issue, the foundational thing. What is that thing at the core, instead of just addressing, like you could have gone and just you're trying to convince her. You're trying to convince her
like
of that, just like we're trying to convince the college kid of how to achieve here and there. And we're missing the belonging. We're missing her discomfort at the bottom.
It's like you're telling too much and not listening enough.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm really interested that part one of your book, I mean, this primary thing, spirals. I mean, that right away, I thought that's different. I have not heard it that way. And as I looked at it, I was really just reminded again of our psychological, personal, to somewhat, I don't want to simplify it. You tell me, but negativity bias, how we're so prone to spiral down with things, to let that negative thing come before the positive. And I grew up in the positivity family, we're the inspirational, motivational thing. And yet I surprise myself so often with realizing how I have just spiraled down. So that's part one of your book is spirals. And then part one under there is spiraling down. And as I was reading the stories, was just brought back again to it feels like this chronic human tendency towards not negativity bias, but also just insecurity. Like I'm so surprised, or not, I shouldn't say surprised, but just I forget about it for myself and the culture, this chronic insecurity. Is that relevant?
Yeah. And I think that one of the things that's really important about that is to understand that it's often the context that's given you those worries. Like we have a kind of mental health narrative that is easily taken to blame people for those feelings, like as though there's something wrong with you. But the first generation student going to college is worried about whether they belong. There's nothing wrong with them. There's nothing irrational for them. There's nothing disordered about them. In fact, that's a very predictable, normal concern. And your experiences with money come directly from your family background, your history of how your family has thought about money and its relationship to a society, gone mad by money. And so when we understand that it's the situation that's your question, you can really start to appreciate how that's a normal thing. It's not something that's wrong with you, and what you might want to do with that thought or feeling.
Okay, well, help me with this, Greg, because as I was looking at, again, our propensity to worry, to take something and write a bad story, there are often times, and you had a story in the book of, somebody making a mistake and then kind of going forward with that perspective. And I struggle sometimes when we hear that thing of, okay, you're spiraling down, just think positive, just write a better story, just change the narrative. And you're going, well, there is some proof. I mean, I did do some stuff that add up to that. And I feel like we sometimes miss that.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, right. So, I don't think the best stories are I love fairy tales, and I don't want to dismiss fairy tales. But the kinds of stories that I'm talking about that really help people to change are not fairy tale stories in which you pretend that everything is wonderful, right? They are often stories that connect with, the reality of people's experience, like that
Yeah.
are the negative thoughts or feelings that people have, the doubt that people experience. They really connect to that. And then they help you see where that comes from and why that's normal and why there's not something wrong with you. And they help you see where you'd like to go with that, like what you'd like to do with that going forward. So in your money story, there's part of that story is an understanding of why of what that feeling was, where that came from, and then there's a question of what would you like to do with that going forward, given the interests and values you have. How could you take a more intentional stance towards that money?
Okay, I'm gonna keep digging on this one and look at a different angle. You shared a story of you in I think preschool, becoming possible doing some things that were not in line with the rules and the guidelines and getting maybe a label of a bad kid. I mean, I saw that. Some of my kids are adopted and they come from a children's home on a reservation. And we saw some pretty stark examples of that, of a kid maybe doing something wrong, maybe doing a mistake, maybe doing something mischievous and getting labeled the bad kid. And then see the years go by and they kind of embrace that and go, were they a bad kid? I don't know. I don't think they probably were, but they did do some stuff that was out of line. They got labeled that and they really became that bad kid. And, again, your book,
Yeah.
looking at the spiraling down, we have some harsh experiences sometimes that lead us down these roads.
So obviously people are capable of doing really, really terrible things to themselves and to other people. And so you can, a spiral down can end in a very terrible place. But it might begin just with that feeling that you have been deemed or seen as a bad kid, and the worry about what that might mean for your prospects, the worry even maybe that might be true in some sense.
Yeah.
And worry that kind of accelerates that downward spiral. So it's not just that we have a tendency to kind of perceive the negative. It's that when we're entertaining these negative thoughts, it makes the world seem more negative, and react to that negative world that we see in ways that drive us down further. That's the downward spiral. So, like in a relationship conflict situation, you might be a little bit worried about about the status of your relationship, whether your partner truly respects you or cares for you. Your partner is late one day, maybe again, and then you think this is proof that they don't respect me, that they don't trust me, that they don't love me even. And then what you're reacting to is not the fact that they were late. What you're reacting to is that feeling that you have, feeling of rejection or that feeling of being dismissed. And if both people are doing that, that's a downward spiral that's going to end a relationship. So the student who, or the young person who has the feeling implicitly even that they might be seen as a bad kid, if that doesn't get interrupted, if that gets manifest in the situation, it can become real over time. And that person do something that's terrible. But it didn't have to be that way. And it doesn't have to be that way. And when we can see and understand those spirals and the way that doubts work to accelerate them, that's when we can create tools that interrupt them and help people to better places.
Okay, tell me this, because Greg, this is an area of significant focus for me right now, that we take an objective reality, let's call it a stimulus. Something happened. Okay, here's an event that occurred, something happened. And within that event, whether you're a kid or an adult, you did something and maybe you had good intent in mind. Maybe you were kind of frustrated and you didn't. Maybe you made a mistake. Maybe you tried something good, but it just went wrong. Anyway, something happened. So here's the event. That's one thing. And maybe there's some consequences to that or not. However, what I feel like you're coming to, and this is my area of interest, is what meaning did we attach to it?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. So in this that's the dynamic in all of these spaces. So in the belonging case, an event happens, like maybe got excluded from a social. Everybody else in the dorm went out to a party and they didn't invite you. That's an event. It's a stimulus, in your words. It's an objective thing. But then there's a question. What does it mean?
Yeah.
What does that mean? How do you interpret that? What does that mean for who you are, for what this place is, for your relationship with those people, for your relationship with other people? And what interventions like the belonging intervention do is they say, yes, that kind of thing will happen. But no, it doesn't have to mean that you don't belong here forever and always will be a loser who's excluded from everything. That was you may well have been excluded. Maybe intentionally, but it doesn't have to mean that you're not going to belong forever. And so similarly, in like conflict situations and with young people, when they're doing things, like another of our interventions is called an empathic discipline intervention. This is an intervention that addresses how teachers think about kids when kids misbehave in class.
Right.
And, a teacher is like in a very complicated role. Like, two of the strongest predictors of teacher value-added scores are, one, the rigor of the coursework, and two, whether the class is on task. So if Johnny in the third row is throwing spitballs, that's a threat to that teacher's mission to create a good learning environment, right? That's a problem. And so what the empathic discipline intervention does is it doesn't say, don't discipline a kid. Like, all of us need rules and all of our communities need rules, and we need to enforce those rules. But when you do discipline that kid, you don't have to do it in a punitive way. So there's stories that are like, one time I acted up in class and my teacher gave me detention, but instead of just sitting there, she actually reached out to me and talked to me about what happened, and she listened. And that made a big difference for me. And so then we asked teachers, like, what do you do? Like, how do you interact with kids when they misbehave? and you need to work with them. How do you maintain positive relationships with your students even when they've misbehaved?
Yeah.
And teachers then will say, they don't say that they don't discipline the kid. Like we all need discipline from each other all the time, right? We all have to play our part in the social worlds that we live in schools and in relationships both. But we can do that with kindness and without judging in ways that maintain relationships and in ways that maintain a belief in the inherent goodness and potential of the person. So instead of dismissing the kid and saying you're a bad person and I don't want you here, to say like what happened, how do we work through that, how do we build on that, and that reduces suspension rates for kids.
I've experienced it, so much, Greg, with having a kid who maybe did something and you go, dude, what you did that was not okay. That was,
Right.
I don't know if we said this, but in essence, we could say that was a bad thing, a bad behavior. You're not, right. But dude, that was a really bad choice. But I want to dig into something further with you. This not happened. I was told this in the discussion about meaning, Greg, and it was a lady, she's late in life now, but she was sexually abused as a little girl. And she took so that happened. So, an event happened or multiple events happened. And, and at some point they stopped, but she went forth, not very uncommon, thinking, I am unworthy, I am tainted, I am dirty also. And we were talking about this and going, what did it actually mean? It means she had a screwed up, in this case, it was her father. She had a screwed up dude. There's a broken, that's about right. The only objective truth that we can come out of it. And she, other than saying, was she unfortunate? Was she unlucky? I don't know, but it didn't mean anything about her. But that's what we do is we have this event happen and we go forward creating this big, huge meaning about us that is so often false. Yeah.
In the book, I quote from Chanel Miller's writings about her experience of a sexual assault on Stanford campus. And she writes very, very, and very powerfully about that shift in identity, that of, all I am in this circumstance is this victim. And, I was a drunk girl and a victim. And that's why she titles her memoir, Know My Name. And it's about a process of writing to reclaim herself and who she is. And then to say in very simple, very short, very direct sentences, I am a woman, I'm a person of worth. I experienced something that was terrible, and I'm a person of worth. I don't have her quote exactly in my head right now, but it's that kind of very simple, very direct language. And the writing process for her was a process of taking back control, just as we were talking before about taking back control on belonging issues or taking back control on money issues, taking back control of identity issues of who am I?
Okay, thank you for going there because that's where I was going right now. Looking at identity that again, I'm going to come back to these root issues that these seemingly small acts, as you talk about, in the book, but they're to big issues that create big change. And you talk about that we're so often talking, or what we're trying to get to is these big, you say these existential questions. As you just said, who am I? We've already talked about, do I belong? And 3, can I do it? I mean, my gosh, if we took every kid and taught them that from the get-go or talked about those, would we not take care of an infinite amount of symptomatic issues that are going to come up later in life?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, these are the big questions. And I would add the trust question and the love questions that come later in the book. Can I trust you? Do you love me?
Yeah.
These are the big questions that define our lives. Are you going to be able to be the kind of person that you want to be, to do what you want to do, to have the impact that you want to have? And when you're struggling, maybe you want to become a medical professional and you're struggling with an introductory chemistry course, and it feels like, can I become the doctor I want to be?
Yeah.
At that point, anything that an educator can do that says to that young person, I see who you can become. We'll fix that right there.
Yeah.
I see who you can become. Like, that's ordinary magic for that person, because that can help work through that. So there's a beautiful intervention by a team at UC Davis, led by Scott Carella, economist, and Mikhail Kurlander. And they call it the My Professor Cares intervention. And it's very simple. Like, they have students beginning in the introductory econ course at Davis, and they send an email to students after a first assignment. And the email says, "Hey, I see you didn't do so well in this assignment. I want you to know that I'm here, for you, to support you in your learning. We have office hours here, and it's early in the course, and you can, we believe in your potential to do this." And that can increase kids' rate at passing through the course successfully.
Okay. Just to continue that thread, when we look at this propensity, and I'm going to end up spending a majority of time here because to me, it's such a biggie, which I assume that's why you let off the book with it, that our propensity to spiral down or spiral up. And you talk about how much of that, again, individual propensity we each have, depending upon our level of self-esteem. Yes?
I think self-esteem is too broad of a term.
Okay.
Okay, like, self-esteem is like, that is in the sense, and also, like, when you lead with self-esteem, you end up. You said earlier you grew up in, like, the positivity world. I was born in 1978, and I well remember, and still today in elementary school classrooms, you'll see kind of these peppered with these positivity statements, like, "You're number one," just like you can't just push away a negative thought. Like, those kinds of statements they don't actually have the specific connection to the questions that people are asking in the specific circumstances.
Yeah.
So, like, the student who has failed, like, maybe you want to, maybe you're taking that introductory econ course and you want to do well in that class, and it's important for who you want to become, and you got a C on the first test, and that's in the bottom half of the distribution, and you feel crappy, and maybe you worry that your math background is inadequate or something. And it's not like there's a self-esteem issue, but it's like up in the air here. Like, concretely in the moment, you're wondering, can I do this?
Yeah.
And communication from an instructor who says, "I see that, I think you can do this." That's the sweet spot. That hits the nail on the head. There was one story I remember from a belonging intervention where a student told us that they wanted to become an engineer, and they were taking an introductory calculus course, and they hadn't done very well at the beginning. And they went to talk to the professor, and the professor said, "Well, you want to be an engineer. Engineering requires a lot of mathematics. You got to get your game up on this." And at first, the student felt kind of deflated by that, but then they thought, "No, like, that is what I need to do." And they bought a high school calculus textbook, a used copy, and they started to go to office hours more often. And they the student told us they started to meet on a weekly basis with this professor. And the professor saw their growth. They saw their growth. And they saw their commitment. And that professor became a mentor who became really a lifelong mentor for the student. The professor retired, the student graduated, and the professor in retirement helped the student in their transition into becoming a professional engineer.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, again, we come back to this, can I do it? Do I belong? And these foundational, to say to some degree, existential issues. I mean, the one in reading more about it and continuing on through the stories in your book, I found myself feeling like, with the do I belong aspect, that we all know that the imposter syndrome, something we talk about a lot, it comes up a lot, that it seems like there's this growing alignment that we all have with imposter syndrome. But reading your book, I thought, on the other side, it's almost like we polarize. Either it's, I'm not good enough, or over here, if I feel like I am, then maybe you're narcissistic. You feel like you really belong. You have no problems. And I'm going, there seems to not be really any middle healthy ground.
We need to build out that middle. We need to build out A friend of mine, a researcher named Eddie Bermelman, going back to self-esteem, he has a kind of three-part recipe for raising kids with high self-esteem. So Eddie is interested in praise and parenting, and also interested in narcissism. And
Okay.
what he that is that we tend to. One of his papers is called something like "My Child is God's Gift to Humanity." So he's like overpraise syndrome. And he shows that we have this tendency to overpraise our children.
Uh-huh.
And that especially when we think the child is susceptible to low self-esteem, we kind of compensate by telling them they're so wonderful. And what Eddie shows is that does two different things. For the kid who does have low self-esteem, it actually drives them down further because it sets up this standard that they think they'll never be able to obtain. And it creates this gap. For the kid who is kind of self-congratulatory, it actually starts to breed narcissism. It starts to make them into this, person you'd never want to interact with, let alone have in your political leadership. But what Eddie says is that what you really need is you need three things. You need honest feedback with the kid about where you are. Here's what you're good at. Here's what you're not good at. You need a growth mindset, like I believe you can get better. And third, you need unconditional regard. I love you no matter what. My love is not dependent upon some attainment or some achievement. I love you. That's the foundation. And then here's where you are, and I think you can get better. And that creates that, I think, middle space where you're neither narcissistic nor just mired in the dumps, but you're growing towards the kind of person that you want to be.
It's the praise issue is such a big one to me. My grandfather's super stoic. My dad probably never got a good word ever. And so he overcompensated. I got lots of praise.
Yeah.
And I would say I was on the self-congratulatory side, and I came out thinking I am Superman. I literally am. It's interesting though, as you talk about those three things: honesty, feedback, growth mindset, and unconditional regard. I probably did not get enough of the honesty feedback of going, okay, that was really good. You're doing really well here. Now you're not doing so great over here. Let's look at that. I didn't get that. That would have humbled me, probably balanced it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's easier to give that honest feedback when you have that foundation of unconditional regard.
Yeah.
Like the feedback isn't an implicit communication of worth or value or love. It's just, here's where you are.
Yeah. It does. It did strike me again, reading the book, that we obviously have such a voracious desire to belong. And yet it feels like our default generally is insecurity as to whether we really do, no matter what. Even like you said, even as a privileged white guy in a university, you still had that the thing we want most, we seem to be the most insecure about. Maybe that makes sense.
I think it makes total sense. Especially when you're thinking about these school spaces, like what is college for? It's for becoming the adult you want to become. Like this is our coming of age ritual, is to go to college either in your hometown or somewhere else. It's a whole new community to get to know, a whole new way to interact with instructors, a whole new opportunity structure, a whole new social network, right? And your opportunities in life, like your opportunity to become the person you want to be, to do the things you want to do, to be in the spaces you want to be in, to have the kinds of relationships you want, like, that's on the table at that point. And so if you are, at all anxious about whether you can belong within that community, then that's tied to all these existential questions.
Okay, let me ask that or address that from a different angle. And the aspect of, can I do it? Both of them. So with belonging, in a sense, we're saying, okay, well, every college freshman steps out. Do you belong? Well, you're saying to some degree, not yet. I mean, you
Right.
don't. This is new. This is new territory. Of course you don't. You're a rookie, so be a rookie, and then ultimately you belong. Same thing with, can I do it? That again, that core aspect. Can I do it? To say, well, maybe not today, but ultimately, sure. That's makes it so much more palatable. It's like, let's go in the shallow end and no, but can you do you belong today? Can you do it today? No. Well, that almost takes the pressure off. No, but you can, you have the ability.
Absolutely. So, like that example of the student who gets excluded from a friend group that's going out for something. All
Yeah.
right, like you got excluded. Like it sucks to be excluded. It doesn't feel good. Nobody likes that. Um, but tomorrow's another day. There's another community around the corner, right? There's another student group, um, and your job is to keep at it and find spaces within that community that are right for you, where you really do authentically fit and belong and have the kind of relationships that are rewarding for you. So that's a step by step kind of process. It's not going to happen all at once.
Okay. I want to hit another piece here, Greg, primary area in the book of who am I, you say. Um, and I'm going to reference something else you said in the book early on. You said you don't talk about mindset specifically a whole lot, but you do make the statement of you find that we culturally tend to be in more of a fixed mindset culture. Okay, that's my preface now to coming into who am I? I am grappling with the concept these days of identity, of who am I, as if it is supposed to be fixed.
Yeah,
Because let's go now to a fixed growth mindset. I'm thinking if I am a growth mindset, which it's my job, it's my vocation, it's my passion is to grow, then how can I ever, why would I ever want to say, boom, this is who I am. I found myself with the concept of like, really? So I'm done. Like I'm fixed, figured it out. I'm done.
yeah.
If I'm,
You're always growing and learning. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the complexities with identity is that, like, I recently saw Hamilton.
yeah.
Who tells the story? You know, is the end of Hamilton. Who tells your story? And I think the problem is a problem of kind of voice and agency. Like people all around you are telling implicitly who you are,
Yeah.
and sometimes those people might be good, and sometimes those people might be neutral, but they might be careless, and sometimes they might be even cruel. And that's why you see like so much effort, I think, on the part of so many different communities to have that assertion of voice, to demand to be seen in the way that they want to be seen. And those are social movements that like trans movements, for example, but also movements like neurodiversity, um, girls who code, Black Lives Matter. Like these are communities of people that are saying, here's how we want to be seen. Because the truth is that identity isn't just about you inside of yourself. It's really foundationally also how you're perceived.
Okay. Well, and in that, let's play with it. I think that there are some aspects, and I'm sure you've read the research too. There are some aspects of us that are genetically seem to be coded in there. We have our upbringing that is dramatically influencing. And, I do want to know, I want some congruity with myself. I do enjoy knowing what
Yeah,
I like, what I don't like, what my strengths and
yeah,
weaknesses are, my predispositions, my propensities.
yeah.
And yet then also realizing that I struggle with the fixedness, yeah, of the labels that we so often get. It feels,
And then we often lack that space to resist those labels. Like
yes,
often we're put in positions where people are making prejudgments
yep.
about, and then we don't have that space to properly resist or properly say, here's who I think I am, and here's who I want to be and become.
It has left me. Tell me what you think of this, Greg. With I've taken so many personality profiles as a human. I mean, as a kid, I was
Yeah,
like my dad's crash test dummy with all these profiles, and I've continued to. I appreciate them. I find value, and I struggle sometimes. I have had times of struggling and look at it going, am I ever going to know? Is it possible to know who I really am? Can we actually be that unbiased and unneutral? I mean, I grew up as a white guy. I'm never not going to be a white guy. I'm never not going to, I grew up in America. I grew up in the South. I grew up in the Bible Belt. I mean, those things happen. They influence me. I'm trying to be aware of those, but can I ever go, okay, who is Kevin absolutely, authentically, and naturally?
It's kind of like looking at a star where you look at it straight on and it disappears a little bit.
That's
Um,
fair. Okay.
it's inherently changing and malleable.
Yeah.
Um, I yeah, absolutely. Like you are you, and you're not going to be someone who hasn't had that particular background. But that also doesn't need to mean that you can't, listen to other people and hear what their backgrounds are like, hear their stories, and and then understand that a little bit better than you might have done before.
Sure. And I want to expose myself to things and yeah, try to have some understanding, get somebody. For me, I found I've got to get other people's help letting me see myself to some degree, not telling me who I am, but helping me see how do they experience me. And again, take it all with, I kind of want to say a grain of salt to some degree. Is that fair?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
When a big part of your book, Greg, is, and we mentioned it before, kind of, again, back to this big primary existential aspect of, and you have it in your book, do you love me? And when I read that, my first thought was, do I think I am worthy of
yeah.
love?
This is self-esteem really comes into play.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it does so directly in the research. So if you're worried about, if you think you're not so worthy, maybe not so attractive, not so smart, not so companionable, then it's hard to believe that anybody could love you. And even if somebody says they love you, you maybe don't fully believe that, or you think they don't know the real you, and that's that creates a dynamic within close relationships that can be problematic.
Okay.
It can produce a downward.
Let me ask a couple aspects on that because I could see the concept of kind of intellectually saying, okay, of course I'm worthy. I've read the books. I did therapy. Okay. I know I'm worthy. So I should be able to be loved. And I'm thinking about myself as often is the case, but going, yeah, but do I love me? Do I love me? I think I'm worthy of love. I would say that intellectually, but I am so hard on myself. I am so disappointed so often in myself because I can't reach my own perfectionism. I think I've had that segment and I see it in other people as well, where they intellectually think, okay, yeah, I know spiritually or from therapy that I'm worthy of love. So, okay, I agree with that. But man, I sure don't act loving to myself. And from that, can I even allow somebody else to love me?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's interesting how much harder we are on ourselves than we are on other people. Almost like um, we know what, like if you're trying to take out a splinter, for example,
Mm-hmm.
it's easier to do it for yourself because you know where the pain gets to be too much.
Huh. Yeah.
Doing it on somebody else, you can be really cautious because you don't know where that point is for them because you're not feeling that feeling.
That's a great way to look at it. And gosh, another piece of it then, Greg, or that I'm thinking of too, is thinking, am I worthy? Am I worthy? And thinking, if I am if I do X. For me, it was performance. If I achieve this, if I act in this way, if I fulfill this, then I'm worthy for my own love and others. But if I don't, which I put myself in a very fixed box doing that.
Yeah, I mean, this is getting back to unconditional regard,
Okay.
right? I mean, this is in the book. I don't know if you've seen Encanto, but in the book, I quote the end of the movie, the Disney movie Encanto.
Mm-hmm.
Encanto, which was very popular in our household because our kids' ages. Your kids are a little older, but in Encanto, every person in the family has a gift, and they're valued at least ostensibly because of that gift. So one person can change the weather, one person's really strong, and and Maribel, the main character, doesn't have a gift,
Mm.
and nobody knows why she doesn't have a gift. and she feels marginalized. She feels like she can't contribute. She feels less than. But then in the end, it's Maribel who brings the family back together, who rebuilds the family home on a more secure foundation. And there's this beautiful scene sung with the song All of You, in which at the end, the house has been built, and her grandmother says to her, "There's one more thing. We have a gift for you." And the gift is the doorknob for the house, and they've written M on it. And the point is that she's loved just for herself, just for who, no gift required, just for her. And to like really like achieve that and feel that and to get to that security for yourself and in your relationships, obviously that does a world of good. And it can be hard to get there, and there can be lots of reasons why we don't get there. But I think that's very helpful to think about that and think about what it takes to build to that.
Greg, that's very late in life for me, that awareness. It honestly is of going, oh my gosh, I'm okay, just me outside of performance. And I think I probably heard it forever, but even in this personal development world, it was focused on performance. That's where my arena was, how you perform all the external stuff and not the internal. And then looking and going, oh my gosh, am I okay if I don't achieve, if I don't perform? I didn't even, it was like a different language. I didn't even understand the question. Like what?
Yeah.
It would be, the answer to half of the therapy questions was, I have no idea what you're talking about. My emotional intelligence was so lacking, really.
Yeah. I mean, there's Eddie, who I mentioned earlier, he did this with adolescents in the Netherlands, where he asked them in the key condition to think about friends of theirs who liked them and admired them even when they did something wrong. And the goal was to kind of affirm this potential for feelings of unconditional regard. Even if they did something foolish. And kids told stories like, I was on the volleyball team and I made a bad play, but my friends still hung out with me. These are like 12-year-old kids. And then a couple weeks later, they received their marks for the first term in the school. And kids who got worse marks generally had more negative self-feelings, like shame.
Yeah.
But that was mitigated amongst those kids who'd done that unconditional regard exercise. So the kids who'd had the space to step back and think about unconditional regard from their peers felt less ashamed of themselves when their grades were lower. Wow. And one of the things about that, I think one of the things that's really important here is to understand that this is work we do together. Like it's work. It's not narrowly work that you do on yourself by yourself, like only for yourself. It's work we do with each other in the kinds of relationships that we have, in romantic relationships, in friendships, and in professional kinds of relationships. I have people have started to send me what I think of as tales of ordinary magic. Mm-hmm. They're really quite beautiful. One person sent me a story where she said, I was experiencing some midlife weight gain. And this is a close friend who had experienced an eating disorder as a younger woman. So she tells me I experienced some midlife weight gain, and I found myself like late at night, Googling weight issues and fitness related issues, and kind of spiraling down in my thoughts. And she said, and I realized this wasn't healthy. This wasn't good for me. This wasn't healthy. So I texted a friend. She texted this friend, and the friend wrote back to her and said, think about how strong you are to have overcome that eating disorder you overcame as a younger woman. Think about what a model that you can be for other women contending with something like a midlife weight gain. And my friend then said, yeah, like my mind completely shifted. And I thought, I can kick the ass of a midlife weight gain. I can be a model for other women. And I got back, she writes to me, I got back to who I am and who I want to be. And I went for a walk. It was in the fall. And she said, I went for a walk in the beautiful fall trees. And I felt home again. And so I think that there's these moments of ordinary magic that happen between people, that happen between people and that can happen between people, where we help each other to those spaces, where a friend helps you to that feeling of unconditional regard, not just you doing your work by yourself or you with a therapist, but like actually in your relationships with the people who matter to you. And when we have greater psychological insights into each other, when we can see, like in that case where my friend's friend saw the doubts that my friend was experiencing, she was able to say the right thing at that moment that inverted that meaning, that made that prior experience of the eating disorder a source of strength and agency and power and goodness, not a source of weakness. And that's something that I think, it's something that parents do for each other, parents do for children sometimes. In the book, I quote the Robert McCloskey story, One Morning in Maine. In One Morning in Maine, Sal wakes up and she says, Mama, I have a loose tooth. I'm not going to be able to go to Bucks Harbor and have it with Daddy and have ice cream with Daddy. And her mother says, Sal, when you lose your teeth, that's when you become a big girl. And the whole first part of the story is Sal trying that idea out, thinking about, like, do seals have teeth? Do they lose teeth? Does baby Jane, has she lost her teeth? Did mommy lose her teeth when she became a big girl? And then she meets her father on the beach and she says, Daddy, I lost my tooth. And her father affirms that idea. It's when you lose your teeth, you become a big girl. And then she goes and has her great day at Bucks Harbor. So, we do that with our children sometimes. We help them to understand these challenges that come up in ways that will be healthy and helpful for them. And we do that with friends as well. And we do that in relationship. And that's where you get to that, like, real depth of unconditional regard. It's in community.
Well, it feels like that. I mean, that word, unconditional regard, that's an ordinary magic, maybe not common, but an ordinary magic. And that's really what I take the book, what resonated most, Greg, is looking at it and thinking that I did come to root cause so often, that we deal so much with symptoms. We don't get to the root cause. And if we will, and with you so often, the stories that you depict in there is just this, somewhat simple perspective change. It is a paradigm shift. And when we make that click, kind of back to that opening statement, like an hour-long surgery can change our lives. How about if we can go and do a psychological surgery, which is what a big paradigm shift is? And that has been the most transformative aspects of my life. When somebody is taking something, actually, it's somewhat of an unlearning, taking something and just saying, wait a minute, you're looking at it this way. What if you just do that? It's ordinary magic, and it's the most profound thing ever.
Yeah. Thank you very much for saying that. It's very beautiful.
Well, thank you. Thank you for being on here. Thank you for doing the work to put this out. I got to tell you, I really appreciate when somebody like you, who is, working where you do, doing the research, teaching this stuff, and then you bring it to us and culminate it in such a tangible way. It's a gift. So I am a grateful student, Greg. Thank you for doing what you've done, bringing this book out. I'm eager and honored to receive it for myself and then to bring it to my audience. So thank you.
This has been a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate the conversation, especially all the sharing that you've done throughout.
Thank you, Greg. Well, thank you. Let's let some other folks listen. All right. Friends, thanks for joining us in this discussion. That again is Dr. Gregory Walton. His new book, Ordinary Magic, the science of how we can achieve big change with small acts. If you want to go from listening and gaining some new knowledge to actually learning, integrating it into your life and getting it into your work as well, a business, I'd be honored to connect with you. Find me at kevinmiller.co or email me, kmiller@kevinmiller.co. Here then is to the evolving you.
Yeah.